All right. So this isn't good. Oh, I gotta turn the screen on so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. Okay. We left off. We were doing this circular flow diagram, and we got households. They own all the factors of production: land, labor, capital goods, etc. They supply those through factor markets to businesses. In return, the businesses pay them money, and that becomes the business's costs. That money becomes the income for the households. Okay. And that includes wages for labor. That includes interest for time. That includes rents for land. And then it includes royalties on things like patents and copyrights. Okay, and then we'll talk a bit about capital goods, what the payment to capital goods is. The mainstream of my profession says it's a rent. The Austrian school says it's interest. You just have to wait. If you say start production of a capital good, you have to wait until a consumer good is eventually produced that's sold to a consumer before you get paid. So it's time, and you have to pay. You get paid interest. Okay. So that income comes into households, and they spend some of it on consumer goods, buying final user goods and services. So if you go to the store, you buy a pizza, you're going to consume the pizza. That's a final user good or service. You buy a backpack, you're going to use it, right? You buy a car, you're going to use it. Okay. Some of these final user goods and services that are produced by businesses, those are purchased by businesses themselves, another business. So we produce a building or a capital good. Those are all capital goods, and another business buys them. So they spend money in this final user good and service market. Okay. Some of these goods are shipped to foreigners. Okay. So we export some of these goods to foreigners. The US makes a Boeing 737 Max, Super Max plane that doesn't fly, and we send it to China, right? And China sends us back money for that, and we label that X for export spending. Export spending. Okay. We also buy final user goods and services from foreigners. So Samsung in Korea makes a cell phone. They send it to America and sell it to you. The payment, the money, I got the right pen, that gets sent back, we label that M for import spending. Okay. So the money we send to foreigners to buy Samsung cell phones or German schnitzel, right? That's called import spending. Now, net exports, NX, is equal to exports minus imports. So NX is net exports. We take the amount of goods we send to foreigners, the spending on that, I mean, that we send to foreigners, the money they give us back for it. Subtract out the amount of money we send to foreigners to buy their goods and services. On net, what's left over is net exports. In the US, do you think this figure is positive or negative? You take the amount of money we spend buying things from foreigners, subtract out, no wait, I'm sorry, the money, you take the money that foreigners spend buying final user goods and services from the US and subtract out the amount of money we send back to foreigners buying final user goods and services. Do you think it's a positive or negative number for the US? Negative, big time, yeah. Okay. So that's usually a negative number. We buy more stuff from foreigners, import spending, than we send to them. The next thing we have is government spending. Okay. Governments buy final user goods and services. And we call that government spending or waste, fraud, and abuse. So the US government buys a taser, they're going to use it on Parker. Okay, they're the final user of that taser. That counts as government spending. Okay. So this is all the different types of spending that go on in the economy. Okay. Now, households don't spend all of their money. Some of that money they save, and we label that money S for savings. So some of the money that households earn through income gets saved, and that goes into the loan and into financial markets. And we use a loanable funds market here is what we call that. That money gets borrowed by businesses and governments, and in return, businesses and governments give households bonds. Okay. A bond is a piece of paper, and it is a promise to pay. It states how much you'll be repaid and when you'll be repaid. Okay. So a bond would typically say, we're going to pay this debt off in 10 years. We're going to pay you 8% interest per year. And at the end of 10 years, we're going to pay off the principal. Okay. Or what we call par. Par and principal are a little bit different, but we don't need to worry about that right now. Okay, so some of the money in this circular flow, oh wait, that money from the product market goes to businesses, and that becomes their revenues. I missed that. Okay, now if you look, we've got this circular flow here. Yeah, that's right. Money goes from businesses to factor markets to households into the product market and back to businesses, that circular flow there. Okay. In the opposite direction, around the outside, we have real goods and services that are flowing through the economy. Okay. In this market right here, we have a graph. I didn't do it either. Did I do the graphs for the labor market and the other one last time? It's been so long. I did. Okay. The financial market has its own graph that goes in there, the loanable funds market. And it looks like this. We have quantity of loanable funds. LF is loanable funds. And up here, we have the interest rate. The interest rate is the price that you pay to borrow money. Okay. Demand for loanable funds is high when interest rates are low, and it's low when interest rates, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. The amount businesses and governments are willing to borrow is low when interest rates are high. And the amount that businesses are willing to borrow is high when interest rates are low. It just makes sense, doesn't it? We label that the demand for loanable funds. There's an inverse relationship between the price of money, in this case, the interest rate, and the amount that businesses are willing and able to borrow. So at high interest rates, the quantity of loanable funds that is demanded by businesses is low. As interest rates go down, the amount of money that businesses and governments are willing to borrow goes up. Okay. On the other hand, households, the quantity of savings they're willing to supply on markets is low when interest rates are low. Okay. And they are high when interest rates are high. So there's a direct relationship between interest rates and the amount of savings that households are willing to provide on this market. So if interest rates go up, the amount of savings that households are willing to supply in this market goes up. If interest rates go down, the amount of savings that businesses are willing and able to supply in this market, households are able to supply in this market goes down. Remember, households supply the savings. Okay. So that is the supply of loanable funds. Where these two curves intersect in this model, that determines the equilibrium interest rate and the amount of money that is both borrowed and lent. Okay. If this amount of money goes up, that means that governments and businesses are borrowing more money. If businesses are borrowing more money, they're investing more, building more factories and plants for us to work in, than businesses for us to work in. If the government's borrowing more money, then they're buying $5,000 toilet seats and $600 hammers and more tasers to zap Parker with. We've been zapped with a taser. That's very surprising. Parker's a good guy, so I know he's never good. Okay, that graph goes in here. So I'm going to draw it real quick. There's a bigger drawing of it over here. Okay, this was that factor market: wages, demand for labor, supply of labor, quantity of labor. Okay, and then this is the product market. Here we had real GDP, price level from last class. That was aggregate demand. That was aggregate supply. The aggregate price level. And oops, that was Y. Star real GDP. Okay. So that is your circular flow diagram. Did I get everything? Savings. Oh, taxes. I forgot. I'm so sorry. That's the one that I like to ignore. Taxes, right? Households send money to the government at gunpoint in the form of taxes. The government uses that money plus whatever they might borrow to buy final user goods and services: more tasers, more tanks, more planes, more guns, more secret prisons, more schools, more roads, more parks. Okay. Now, this is supposed to explain how an economy operates. Okay. And a man named John Maynard Keynes came along and said, well, we'd like more stuff flowing through these pipes, wouldn't we? We'd like more houses built, more cars, more food produced, more clothing. Okay, we'd like that. Okay. But we can't measure that, okay? Because you can't add apples and oranges. I can't add the number of airplanes with the number of cars, the number of shirts, the number of pairs of pants, the number of pairs of sunglasses, the number of economics lectures produced, the number of, tons of grain produced, and come up with a meaningful number that would express how well the economy is doing or how much stuff it's producing. Okay, so the national income accountants decided that they would count the amount of money flowing through this big pipe here. Okay, the amount of money circulating in the economy, and that would somehow be a good proxy measure for the amount of real stuff that's flowing through the outside. Now, there's a lot of problems with this, okay? What do you think the relationship is between the amount of money flowing through this green pipe relative to the amount of goods and services flowing through the, I guess it was supposed to be brown, but it's purple pipe. Brown marker ran out of time. What do you think the relationship is in there? How about prices? Right? For any given amount of money flowing, any amount of real stuff flowing through the economy, the amount of money flowing through it is also determined by the prices that you pay for it. So prices go up and the amount of stuff flowing through that pipe doesn't change. We'd have more money flowing through the green pipe, but the same amount of stuff flowing through the brown pipe. So we'll find out later that we're going to have to adjust for prices to come up with what we call real GDP. Now, there's two methods for calculating GDP. The first one is the expenditure approach. And that's what, good.
Does that mean there's inflation then? If there's more money going through than there are goods and services being produced?
Inflation in this model occurs when there's more money flowing through the pipes because of higher prices, that it increases faster. The amount of money increases faster than the amount of real stuff flowing through the pipes does. Okay. Now, John Maynard Keynes thought that real output was generated by spending. So that if people spent more, that would cause more real stuff to flow through the brown pipe or the purple pipe on the outside. Okay. So if you want to get, say, an economy that's in a recession, if you want to get it going again, you got to increase spending, okay, on final user goods and services. And that means increasing C, I, G, or NX. Okay. Now, I always found this to be an insane, ludicrous idea. Take those sunglasses that Parker's wearing. Parker, when you went to the store to buy sunglasses, did you give them your money and then they went out and pulled some oil up out of the ground, dug up some silicone, I think is what glass is made of, dig up some sand and put it into a burner and make the glass for them, and then take the oil and combine it with other chemicals to make the plastics and then shape them and form them and pop the lenses in and then hand them to you? Somebody had already done that first. So how could Parker spending money on the sunglasses have somehow caused the sunglasses to appear? It seems to me backwards. Okay, someone went and did all of that stuff expecting Parker to come in and spend the money. The sunglasses were produced, marketed, and sold before you ever spent the money. So how could Parker spending the money now have caused the sunglasses back then? That would be like saying, Alina, that you caused your parents. Did you cause your parents? No, they caused you, right? They came first. Right? So I've always found it to be a ludicrous idea. Now, the expenditure approach is one way that we measure GDP, and we take a little meter here, and this is called the expenditure approach. And we add up all the money coming into, I think I got them all, the final user goods and services market. Okay. And there's an equation for it, and this is the most important equation in all of modern macroeconomics. So make sure you write this down. Okay. Okay. GDP, which we'll later find use the same formula for aggregate demand. GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. This equation is so important that I want everybody to stand up and we're going to do a dance and you're going to yell the letters out back to me. So if everybody would please, after you've written it down, you can certainly write it down. Stand up. We're going to do a dance. G, yes, C plus I plus G plus NX, and then all those terms are defined there in the green next to it. C is consumer spending, also known as personal consumption expenditures. I, shorthand, is investment spending, that is gross private domestic investment in the GDP accounts, that's a big long name. G, we call it government spending, that is government expenditures for consumption and investment, I believe, in the GDP accounts, got one name. NX is net exports, and it's net exports in the GDP accounts. X is export spending, M is import spending. These two get lowercase letters. I tried to make it look like that because they're sub accounts. They're part of this bigger account, net exports. Okay, so if everybody will stand up for me for just a second. Anybody, any ladies cheerleader in high school? No? Any of you guys? Cheerleaders in high school? I'm not gonna make fun of you if you were. All right, so. I hated high school. All right, so here we're gonna go. G, what we gotta do it? G, D, P is equal to C. Are you sure you were never, Dan, are you sure you were never a cheerleader in high school? You're very good at this. C plus I plus G plus N X. Everybody repeat it back to me. GDP is equal to.
GDP is equal to plus
Okay, you've got to remember that. Okay, you've got to remember that equation. Okay. Now there are 4 sectors in the economy when we draw this thing all the way out, finally, like we just did. Oh, thank you. We have consumption, investment, like government spending, and then net exports, NX. There's your equation. That right there is NX, X minus M. A look at what these things are composed of. Can I move this? I don't think I can. All right. Of these accounts, and this is from 2014, so this is dated data, right? It's old. You've got consumption, which is the largest, there we go, portion of the economy. and this is back from 2014, that was $11.9 trillion. Okay, and that's 69% of the economy, according to GDP figures. That's broken down into different types of spending. And this kind of shocks some people. These are durable goods. Those are things like washing machines. They're going to last a long time, right? More than a year, let's say. You're not immediately consuming them. You're consuming them over a long period of time. A washing machine is a perfect example. Dishwasher, a lawnmower. Those are examples of durable goods, okay? Then you have non-durable goods. That's things you consume immediately, like toothpaste, steaks, food, right? And then we have services. $8 trillion in the US economy is spent on services. That could be auto mechanic repairing your car, some guy out there mowing your lawn, right? Then we have gross private domestic investment, and that's only $2.8 trillion, which is about 16% of the economy. Most of that is in the form of fixed investment, capital goods, and some of that is changes in business inventories. That counts as investment spending. Okay. Then we have government spending, government consumption expenditures, and gross investment. I think I misspoke when I gave you the title for that earlier. I think I called it government consumption and investment expenditures, but that's the actual full title there. 3.2 trillion, look at that. We spend more money on government spending than all of the money spent investing in new businesses and places for you to work. Capital goods, okay? And of that, 1.2 trillion is federal and 2 trillion was state and local. Now this number is way up now, okay? Probably gonna be about 5 or 6 trillion this year is be my guess, just for federal spending, especially with the COVID relief bill, which most of it was not spent on checks to you, just to let you know. Government welfare, spending money in Pakistan to make sure that they accept transgenders and all kinds of good stuff like that. Bailing out the airlines, bailing out pension funds for mismanaged states. And then here's net exports. You can see it's a negative number. So we bought $500 billion more worth of stuff from foreigners than we sold to them. And that's about 3% of GDP. And back in 2014, GDP was about $17.4 trillion. It's up over 20, I think it's 23 or 24 trillion this year. Last year, the year just finished.
So what's keeping us from exporting more than we are? Like, why are we having to buy?
That's a good question. We don't produce a lot of stuff here anymore, right? Manufacturing is down in the US. This is not on your test. My personal belief on it is that it has to do with the Federal Reserve and the dollar status as a reserve currency. Because foreigners hold US dollars, and that could be in their central banks, in their banking system, or on their black market. And they hold dollars because almost all oil has one price and one price only, the oil price. It is designed this way. The US is the dominant hegemonic power in the world. Therefore, they dictate the terms of trade. And as such, the dollar is the world's reserve currency. If you are a foreign central bank, that issues your own currency, you have to hold assets so that you can buy back that currency when it gets too low. And then you sell currency to buy assets. Typically, foreign central banks will buy US dollars. The Bank of China, right? People's Bank of China. Every night at midnight, they go through their banking system and they buy up all of the dollars that are in the banking system. And those become reserves for their central bank. That increases the demand for dollars, which increases its price. Its price isn't in currency, it's in terms of the world, the rest of the world's currencies. So that promotes a strong dollar. The US can export their inflation overseas. And when we do that, that makes the dollar stronger, that makes foreign currencies weaker. If the exchange rate between the dollar and the yuan goes down, right? Need fewer yuan or more yuan to buy a dollar or fewer dollars to buy the yuan. That makes Chinese goods less expensive in the US, all other things being equal. And it makes US goods more expensive in China, all other things being equal. Okay. So we print dollars up and those dollars go overseas and get held instead of being used to buy back or buy US goods and services with.
So we're kind of getting ripped off. We're getting pretty ripped
Actually, the rest of the world is the one getting ripped off. Because think about
It's
it.
the other way around.
We buy all their stuff and send them less back for it. And then they get stuck holding our paper dollars that we don't want. So really, we exploit the rest of the world through this system. And we can print dollars up. And instead of them staying here in the US causing price inflation, they go overseas, get held in central banks, and they cause price inflation overseas. With all of the dollars we're printing up right now, a lot of countries are having problems because food prices are going up around the world, making it harder for people to feed themselves, especially in poor countries.
Is our imports there, does that include like American companies like that move to other countries?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that explains.
Well, GDP is concerned with where those goods and services are produced. If they're produced within the bounds of the United States, it doesn't matter if it's a US or a Japanese or a Chinese or a German company. If it's produced within the US, counts as towards US GDP. Ford produces a car in France, and the Ford's an American company. That would count toward France's GDP. And then if they ship that car back to the US and sold it to us, that would be import spending because we'd be sending money to France. Even though it's Ford, we're sending Ford and France money. The other approach we have is the income approach. And this is the method that measures GDP by adding up all the incomes that come into households. Okay. We calculate GDP using the expenditure approach, C plus I plus G plus NX. Or we can calculate it using the income approach. The income approach, I'm going to write the abbreviations for these up above them. Okay. This is all the income that comes into households. And then there are what we call two non-income adjustments we have to make. Some money that's spent doesn't come into households, so we have to add that in. The first thing we have here is compensation of employees. That's W. You can also think of that as wages and salaries. That's why we abbreviate it with a W. That's compensation of employees. Then we have R For rents, that makes sense, R. Then we have business profits, pi. Pi is for some reason the international symbol for profits. I guess because it's the Greek letter P. Economists and intellectuals, we like to have symbols because it makes us think smart, makes us seem smarter. And you can't understand what we're talking about unless you know what the symbols are. So we make a lot of symbols. We like to use Greek letters. That makes us look really smart, like Aristotle or something. Net interest, NI. Now, that's not what you think, right? We, like when you go and you borrow money, say you go out and borrow money to buy a house and make payments, those are interest payments. There's interest in that plus principal. Those interest payments are not what we're talking about with net interest, because you bought the house, you're paying the interest, but Dan savings were used to buy the house, right? Well, that's a wash. You're negative interest, right? You're paying interest, so it's positive. She's receiving it, that's negative, they wash out. Okay, that's really just interest paid to households from businesses and governments. Consumer debt washes off, right? You're receiving interest, he's paying it, it's a wash. Okay, but Alina owns a bond from IBM, and they make interest payments to her every year, right? That's your income. And IBM's not a household, right? So that doesn't wash, so that counts. You own a government bond, which I hope you don't. And the government makes an interest payment to you, right? The government's not a household, right? So it doesn't wash. So those two payments count, but your mortgage doesn't. Your credit card doesn't, right? Your credit card payment, that's Parker's savings. He's getting the interest, you're giving it away, it's a wash. Okay, then these are the two non-income adjustments. The first one is indirect taxes. These are taxes. I'm gonna go to the slide for that one real quick. Okay, so we got W, R, pi, NI, net interest, and then indirect taxes and depreciation. We don't have symbols for those. I don't know why. Okay, so there's compensation. One thing here is you have to remember it's certain supplements paid to labor. Like if you look at your paycheck, okay, there are some things you're paid that you're not shown on your paycheck. One of them is that you have to pay, I think 7.2% of your income for Social Security taxes. I forget the exact figure. I think 7.2%. That shows up on your paycheck, right? Because they take it out of your paycheck. But what you don't see is the business has to match your Social Security contribution. That doesn't show up on your paycheck. So that payment where they match your 7.2% to Social Security, that's a supplement to labor that counts in as wages. Another thing you don't see is, like here, I have insurance. I have I pay like, I don't know, I'm gonna say $300 a month. My insurance is probably worth $1,100 a month. Okay, the school pays $800 of it roughly. That $800 doesn't show up on my paycheck, but they're paying it to me, right? You just give it to the insurance company. So that's a supplement to labor. Okay. I work for a bank, and when I worked for the bank, they automatically, I just automatically got like a $10,000 life insurance policy. That the payment the bank was making for that little policy, that would count as a supplement to labor. Okay.
Would the amount that like your job matches on like
401k, yes.
Okay, that counts too?
Yep, that would count too. But I think that would show, I'm not sure if that shows up on your paycheck or not.
If you do it with, if like they have like a certain insurance, it does, but if you have like an outside one, they usually don't show it on there. Because I used to talk to an accounting factory I worked in. Yeah. And I learned about it because like they had one set up, and then I got a different IRA outside of the company.
Yeah. Then that would, No, they would have put that in the paycheck. All right. Rental income, this is rent and royalties received by property owners who permit others to use their assets, okay? So, and here's something new, what do they call it? The sharing economy now, right? Let's say you own a home and you rent it out through Verbo or Airbnb. Those Airbnb payments would count as rent. Okay, plus if you just owned an apartment building, you rent it out. Royalties, these are received for copyrights and patents. So if you let someone play your music, you get a royalty for that copyright. And then these two, they're calling it two incomes: profit, business profit. There's two different types of profit, and it's proprietor's profit and corporate profit. A proprietor is for a self-proprietorship or for a partnership. And that's where you and the business are the same person, okay? So if you're a sole proprietor, right, Noah, the profits of the business are your income, okay? But those are proprietor profits. On the other hand, let's say that you and Alina own a corporation together, right? There, the business, that business makes profits. Those are corporate income, and they're taxed separately. And then the business doesn't have to pay it to you, do they? Right? You could earn profits in your business instead of paying dividends to yourselves. You could reinvest the money or whatever. Okay. So those corporate profits and proprietor profits make up pie, business profits. NI, net interest, we already talked about that. We don't need to go over it again. Indirect business taxes. These are taxes levied as a percentage of the prices of goods sold and therefore collected as part of the revenue received by the firms. The classic example of this is a sales tax. Okay. I think I told everybody to go buy some colored pencils before the break. If you didn't get them, maybe you can still get them. Down to Dollar Tree. If you go down there to the Dollar Tree and you buy those pencils, how much do they cost?
$2.
No, if you go to the Dollar Tree. No,
$1 or $2, depending on which one you get.
no, not Dollar Tree, they're $1. Everything's $1.
You get
It's $1.09 or $1.10. They just put $1 on there, right? If you think the Dollar Tree's $1, no, it's not. It's $1.09 or $1.10.
Yeah.
The dollar they put on it, because that's the price they're charging. That's all they want for it. But the government wants their cut too. So if you went and bought the pencils, they'd have to be worth at least $1.09 or $1.10, depending upon if you're in Gadsden or Rainbow City when you buy them. Otherwise, you won't buy them. So the value of those pencils is the dollar plus the sales tax to you. But the business only gets $1. And after they pay their cost, their profit comes out of the $1, not the $1.09. The 9 or 10 cents that you pay sales tax, that goes to the state, the city, and maybe the federal government. It doesn't count as anybody's income, so we got to add it back in. And then this other one is depreciation. Now, if you got, how many of you had accounting? Raise your hand if you've had accounting yet. You haven't had accounting yet? Okay. If you look at an accounting income statement, right? Income statement for a corporation or a business, you'll find revenues, right? And then you're going to subtract out costs. And what's left over is profit. One of these costs is depreciation. Okay. So let's say I have a business and I have a 18-wheel tractor trailer truck. Okay. I buy that truck for $100,000 today. That truck is going to last for say 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, it'll be worthless. I can't write the full $100,000 that I pay for the truck now, even if I whip out cash and pay cash for it. I can't call that all a cost right now, because I'm gonna use that truck for 10 years. So what we do is there's different ways of doing it. The simplest is we take the value of the truck, $100,000, divide it by its useful life. Okay. And then that comes out to $10,000 a year. So every year from that truck, because we're driving it, we're using that $100,000 value in the truck up. Every year, we're going to write down $10,000 as the cost of using that truck. We're going to do that for 10 years. The problem here is that when we write that truck off by $10,000, that increases profits by $10,000, and money was spent to generate that profit. But unlike every other cost, no one gets a check for depreciation. A lot of times the company will just have a separate account, and every year they'll put 10,000 in it, right? So that hopefully, you know, at the end of 10 years, they use that money to buy a new truck. But no one gets a check for that, even though it shows up as a profit for the business. So we got to add that in, because it doesn't become someone's income. Okay. And that is how you calculate GDP using the income approach. We're adding up all the different types of money that come into households here: wages, rents, profits, net interest, and then those two non-income adjustments. The two non-income adjustments are indirect business taxes, or indirect taxes, excuse me, and depreciation. And the reason we do that is because things were produced worth that amount of money, but it didn't become someone else's income, so we got to add it in there. If we do it right, we should get the same number from the income approach that we got from the expenditure approach. It should work out. In reality, it doesn't. I've heard, and I'm not a GDP account expert, but a lot of that has to do with smuggling, drugs, and yeah, I guess that's under the table type stuff. Now, the breakdown for GDP when we use the income approach. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay. There it is. Okay. W, compensation of employees, $9.2 trillion in the year 2014. That's 53% of GDP. Okay. Rental income, very small proportion of GDP, 0.6, that's $600 billion. That's only 3% of GDP. Profits, 3.5 trillion, 20% of GDP. Corporate profits are 2.1, proprietors profits are 1.4. These are almost always small businesses, and a lot of those are small businesses as well. Okay. You ever hear people say, oh, you know, we could give universal health care and free college and universal basic income, right? Nobody would ever be poor, which no one ever is poor anyway. And we can do all this stuff, and we just got the fat cats and the corporations, right? The evil corporations, right? They ain't got enough money. The US federal government budget deficit this year is probably more than that. That's just 1 year. As if we took every corporation's profits. And a lot of those aren't big guys, right? Yeah. My dad was a corporation and he had a business in one shop. Right? You get to get those fat cats, right? Just get them. Also, these corporate profits, they don't belong to corporations. Corporations don't own anything. They're just pieces of paper. I mean, literally, Noah and I go out and start a business, right? And we could put this will be a machine press here, right? There's a machine press, in case you can't tell, right? We could get a truck. Right, we could get a truck, some tools. There's a wrench, in case you can tell. Okay, and buy them. Who owns those? We do, right? We bought them. Now, this is all a corporation is. Now, instead of Noah owning the wrench and the machine press, and me owning the truck, we drew a circle around it, and we said, now N&J Corporation own it. And then Noah and I own N&J Corporation. Is there now something walking around called a corporation that's out there screwing people and doing evil things and making all this money and just being fat cats? No. Hopefully we make some money, and maybe Noah and I could be the fat cat someday. Right? But that's it. That's it. I just basically just draw a circle around it. And that's done by filling out some paperwork that costs 75 to, who knows how much, depending upon what kind of business we have, to incorporate. That's it. That's it. That's all it is. And the payments we make out go to our investors. If it's just Noah and I, that could be Noah and I. You know what a lot of investors are in corporations? Insurance companies, right? Pension funds. You said you had a 401k or an IRA. You own stock in corporations, probably, directly or indirectly. Yeah. Guess what? Those payments go to you and you and you and me. And orphanages, right? And insurance companies, so that when Noah falls and breaks his arm, the insurance company has enough money to pay his medical bills for him, right? If someone's dad dies, there's enough money for them to pay a claim to his heirs.
What about monopolies? What if a monopoly?
Well, monopoly, there's different views on this. I would say a monopoly is only something that can be done through a government grant. The government says you are the only one who can do this. And the biggest grantor of monopolies is the government. And the biggest grants of monopolies are through copyrights and patents. If you invent a new computer code, right, the government will give you a copyright, which means no one else can use that code for the life of the author plus 70 years. It's the same as if you wrote a book. On the other hand, a patent's typically around 13 to 17 years, depending upon what type of item it is, like medical, they have longer patents than just typical, if you invented a better mousetrap. That's a grant where the government says no one else can make that mousetrap for 13 years or whatever, 17 years, whatever. No one else. If they do, we'll beat them up, take their stuff, and throw them in jail. Or more likely, they can pay you.
I should know they did that.
Yeah.
That they would have actually created their own.
Yeah, those are all monopolies. Most monopolies that we can think of are things like the power company, the gas, the water. Those are all government granted monopolies. The government says, what's the name of it? Spire can provide a gas line to your house using our streets. No one else can. And the biggest monopoly is the government. Government is a group of individuals or an institution that claims a monopoly right on the use of force. No one else but the government can use force against you. if, if I personally kill Noah, it's murder, right? Unless I'm the government, then, it could be the death penalty, it could be collateral damage, right? I can't take Noah's stuff if I take 20% of his income. I'm a thief, I'm a criminal. The government does it, we call it taxes. If I kidnapped Noah, humiliated him for 2 months, dressed him in an ugly green costume, put a gun in his hand, and told him to go shoot people he doesn't know, that would be extortion, kidnapping, right? If I threaten to hurt him, extortion, right? But the government does it, we call it conscription. The draft, right? If Noah commits a crime, say he hurts you, I can't go beat Noah up and enslave him in my dungeon, right? But the government can, and we call that law enforcement. Those little green paper tickets you have in your pockets. If I were to print them up, what would you call me? A counterfeit. If Benjamin Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, does it, we call it quantitative easing or monetary policy. Why can't I'm probably as smart as he is. Why can't I be in charge of monetary policy? I know I need more money. But yeah, that's where it works. Let's get here. Okay, so we did that. Indirect business taxes, 1.3 trillion, that's 8% of the economy. And then depreciation, 2.3 trillion, that's 13% of the economy. And GDP, you can see it was 17.4, that's the same it was on the other graph that I had when we did the expenditure approach. So it should come out even. All right. So you get the same number either way within reason.
Can we look at the GDP of like any year?
Yeah. Yep. Now, this is the problem. Too many people think that GDP is somehow some sort of measure of well-being. It's not a good measure of anything. It's severe problems. The first one is, it does not count non-market transactions. We're trying to figure out how much stuff, what's the value of all the things produced within a nation's boundary during a given time period, usually a year. Okay? We don't count non-market transactions. Okay? Think about the household. Think about how many things are produced within each one of our households. Okay? Y'all like to eat? Okay? If you go to the store and you buy a steak and you buy some potatoes and you pay your gas bill and your electric bill and you buy some butter and some I don't know, some juice or whatever. I know what you guys drink with that stuff. I'll buy yourself a 12-pack of non-alcoholic beverages, right? That counts towards GDP. Is that a steak dinner yet? No. You have to wash the steak, season it, cook it, put it on a plate. You have to peel the potatoes, slice them, mash them, boil them or whatever you do and make mashed potatoes with them. And you have to cut the slab of butter off and put it on top, right? And then then you have to pour the juice or the non-alcoholic beverages. And then you can sit it at the table and eat it. The value of all those things does not get counted towards GDP if you make your own dinner. It does if you go to a steak restaurant. right? How about this? How many of you wash your own clothes? Most of us don't even know how much it costs to take it down to the laundromat and have them do it. If they do it at the laundromat, that counts towards GDP. If you do it, it doesn't. Repairing your own car. Cleaning your own house. How about that? Anybody know what that costs? Taking care of your own kids. My wife stays home, right? She supposedly takes care of my kids and my house, although I don't know if that's true. I don't think she does much. How to get one of those teddy bears with the camera so I can make her count for her day, but she won't let me do it. What if I had to pay for all that? That would count towards GDP, but because my wife stays home and supposedly does all this stuff, it doesn't count towards GDP. So it doesn't count non-market transactions. And that includes underground economy, right? Drug trafficking, prostitution. Unless you're in my home state of Nevada in a rural county, then prostitution is legal and it counts towards GDP. Drug dealing, right? Sell a bag of weed here in Gadsden does not count towards GDP because it's illegal and it doesn't get counted. Do it in my home state of Nevada or California or a lot of other states, it counts towards GDP. Gambling, right? You want to gamble here in Alabama, unless you go to one of the Indian reservations, right? We go out behind we have to go out behind the gas station, right? And throw craps. Have you ever done that? Anybody? Ever thrown craps behind a gas station? I don't trust them. Then count towards GDP. Go to Vegas, stay at the Caesar's Palace and throw $1,000 down on the table. It counts towards GDP. Distribution, kind, and quality of products. It doesn't take that into account. And this is a big one. What about things that the government buys? There is no market price for that road out here, George Wallace Drive. There isn't. We don't know how much that road is worth because nobody pays to use it. So when governments produce things, they just count the cost of that the government pays for it towards GDP. What if the government spent $1 for that road? It would have been a good deal, wouldn't it? It's worth more than $1. Do you think they paid $1 for it? Do you think they underpaid for it? They probably overpaid for it. What if they paid $10 million for that road?
Yeah, I was about to say, like, couldn't they be overpaying? Because it's not like what happens in a lot of socialist countries, it's like micromanage.
Well, it happens in every government. Governments always overpay for things. And here's why. Think about it. The government pays for wars, right? But they don't tax you for the cost of war. Like when the Iraq war happened, did the government raise your taxes? Oh, got more expenses now. We got the big Iraq war, right? And we need you to each contribute $2,000 a year each to pay for the war. Did they do that? No. You know why they didn't do that? Because they knew if you knew the cost of what was going on, you'd be like, yeah, maybe I don't like Saddam Hussein that much, but I'm not paying 2 G's a year to get rid of them. You know, but the Iraqis get rid of them if they don't like them, right? A police officer, right, patrols around here to make sure that we're not using drugs. Would you pay him to do that? No. I'm gonna pick Alina here because I know she would never use them, but you know, Alina, if you're using drugs, stop. But I'm not paying someone to watch you to make sure you don't use them. Okay? Stop it, Alina. Okay, just stop. All right. Don't do it. Just say no. All right. How about this? How about the COVID lockdown? How many of us would pay for that?
I saw a video the other day. Thank God we're in Alabama. My understanding is I don't think anybody's been arrested for not wearing a mask.
They were finding them in Buford.
In my home state of Nevada, to enforce the masks, they send health inspectors into businesses. If you don't have a mask on, they don't say a word to you. They find the business. Yeah.
Wow. You're just hurting the bit, you're hurting small business.
I know, they're running people out of business. I saw a video the other day of a pregnant woman at a Catholic church during mass with communion still on her tongue. Now the stupid priest called the cops on her. Yeah. And the police showed up and arrested her. They didn't arrest her. They grabbed her by the arm and made her leave. They were going to arrest her if she didn't leave. And then they gave her a ticket, and about 4 cops showed up. Meanwhile, if Parker was strangling, his wife, the wife of Parker, he wouldn't do it anyway. But if Parker's strangling his wife, maybe they have one lady cop show up, But this to kick this lady out of mass, pregnant lady too, pregnant with a 1-year-old in her arms. So she's a good Irish family, nice Irish twins. You all know that story? You know what Irish twin is? If the baby is less than I think a year older than the other one, it's Irish twin. Because Catholics said to multiply. This is Irish ones. They'll wait too long.
Where did she find a new church?
Well, it's funny is I saw that video, and then I saw one like right next to it after it. The COVID police showed up at the mass uninvited at another church. It was an old Polish priest, man. He's telling them, "You get out of here! Shut up! I don't want to hear you! Get out! Get out! You Nazis!"
And they left too.
Yeah, they left.
They turned around.
He
and
chased
left.
them out.
So you gotta be with them.
Yeah.
I don't know if they weren't like that about that.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
this is
they'll
a
shoot
tricky
you.
thing, but come on.
Huh?
I said, I think this whole masking is a little tricky, but I think it's some go overboard either way.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean, he said, you can't go in somewhere without a warrant. Right? Seek out. Come back when you got a warrant. But, so anyway, paying for all that, right? But the thing is, if these things were worth that much money to you, you would generally voluntarily pay for them. No one has to tax you to make sure that you have shoes on. Because it's worth having shoes to you and you'll pay for it. Yet, everything the government provides, they have to extort from you at the threat of force to get you to pay for it. So I think almost everything the government buys is overpriced. It's not worth what they pay for it. Because they don't pay anything for it. Stick a gun in someone's head and say, but you're paying for it. Neglect of leisure time. And the government GDP does not count what we call economic bads. You can think of that as like pollution. Okay. In fact, economic bads actually can cause GDP to go up. Let's say that Dan has a farm and Parker has a factory next to the farm, and Parker has an accident at his factory or just dumps toxic waste all over Dan's farm. Is the world a better place now? No, all the food that Dan was producing is now gone, right? You can't farm on it anymore. And then we might make Parker pay $10 million to clean your farm up, right? Sue him and they say, yeah, the court says, yeah, you got to pay $10 million. That $10 million that Parker spent cleaning up your farm will count towards GDP. Are we any better off than we were before he spent the 10 million? No, before he polluted the land, right? That's a wash, isn't it? But the $10 million counts, but the damage doesn't. And we call that economic bad. So if Parker pollutes the whole world and has to pay $14 trillion to clean it up, That's $14 trillion in GDP, when in reality, he just messed everything up and is fixing it.
And at the same time, I'm losing money.
Yeah, well, you might or might not. So here, GDP is quantitative rather than a qualitative measure of the output of goods and services. It's just an attempt. People treat it like it came from God. It's a number that came from God. Oh, GDP went up. Everybody's better off. No. Okay. It's actually a pretty poor measure. Other measures are national income, personal income. I'm not going to go over these. You can read those in the book, but I am going to go over nominal and real GDP. National income, I'll do this real quick, is the total earned by resource owners, including wages, rents, interest, and profits. So we take GDP and we subtract out those two non-income adjustments, and that becomes national income. So here we subtract out depreciation. Personal income is the total income received by a household. I'm sorry, my fault. I said both, didn't we? We just subtract out depreciation here for national income. Then for personal income, we subtract out the payment of taxes. Disposable personal income. As I said, the payment of taxes, didn't I? I meant indirect taxes. Not indirect taxes. Here, disposable personal income. This is something you might actually see in the news someday. This is the amount of income that households have to spend or save after the payment of personal taxes. Okay, that's these taxes here that you pay, not those indirect taxes. They've already been subtracted out. Okay, so we take personal income and subtract out personal taxes. That's disposable personal income. That's actually of some use to people. I had a client once when I worked at the bank. He was a vet. And this guy was really smart. If you ever go to like Auburn, okay, or probably Gadsden, look at all the veterinarians around. Okay. He wanted to start up a vet clinic in Auburn. And there's a lot of them. So what he did was went down to the Chamber of Commerce. He got a map of Auburn with the disposable personal income levels for the people in all the neighborhoods in it. Then he put a dot for every single vet agency there was. He found out that 90% of all pet owners go to a vet within like 3 miles of their house or something. So he took each one of these veterinarian businesses, drew a 3-mile circle around them. So I can't go there. And then there were 2 spots open with a place big enough to put his circle. One of them had a high disposable personal income. One had a low disposable income. Where do you think he put his vet place? The high, right? Because people with high disposable incomes typically have the money and are able to afford to get their pets treated and shots and stuff like that. And I'll tell you, I had a conversation the other day. Where the hell's Mary? I'm gonna have to fail her. I hate animals. Like, I mean, I like dogs. The guinea pigs are okay, but I really don't like having animals around. It's too much work. Costs me too much money. My family has we have 2 dogs. I didn't authorize any of them. We have 4 cats. I authorized 1, and I don't even like cats. And then 2 guinea pigs and a bunny. Okay. Think about how much vet money that is here, if they're well. Okay. And the first cat, the one I actually authorized a dog, and they came back with a cat. That thing liked to climb up on the windowsills on the 2nd story of our house, and it fell one day, shattered its leg. It's a free cat. I'm like, put it down, man, get us a number. My wife goes down there and of course she brings the kids like an idiot. And the vet's like, oh, I can save this cat. I'm not there. I would have been like, you can save him all you want, but I don't own him anymore. You can put him down or you can keep him. Save him all you want, but I ain't paying for it. So my wife's there with the kids and she's like, oh, okay. So he puts the cat's leg back together. He did a good job, I'll admit that. The cat's still running around. $750 for a free cat. I'm like, they're free, I'll go get you 750 of them. I mean, the cat's worth nothing. No one would pay for the cat. Yeah, I gotta pay 750 for it? I'm like, you're crazy. All right. The last thing I want to do is nominal versus real GDP. Nominal GDP, every year we add up using either the expenditure approach and the income approach, add up, count up GDP. But there's a problem. We can't compare it over time because the value of a dollar, and this is GDP is calculated in dollars, changes over time. So in order to try and estimate or find something to use as a proxy for the amount of real stuff going through the outside of that, in that purple pipe, by counting up the green stuff going through the money pipes, we have to adjust for prices each year. And when we add this up each year, that's called nominal GDP. We're just counting the amount of money flowing through that green pipe, either in the income or the expenditure approach. That's called nominal GDP. Nominal GDP isn't very useful to us because we can't compare it over time because it's in dollars, and every year the value of a dollar is different, so we can't compare them. So what we do is we calculate real GDP. That is the value of all final goods produced during a given period of time based on the prices existing in a selected base year. We arbitrarily pick one year, it doesn't matter which year we pick, and we use the prices from that year. Now, what we'd like to do is, if we could, say, here's the things produced this year, use that base year's prices, just multiply the number of planes times the base year price for a plane, do the same thing for oranges and apples and everything in the economy, and then just add it up. But we can't do that, okay? Because the planes aren't the same, right? Oranges aren't the same, all this other stuff. So what we end up doing is we construct what we call a price index, and that is called the GDP chain price index. So GDP chain price index. And that is a measure that compares changes in the prices of all final user goods and services during a given time period to the prices of those in a base year. So what we try to do is construct a market basket of goods and services that an economy produces. So we might have an airplane that we export to foreigners. We've got some oranges in here. We've got some four-wheel drive trucks, right? We've got some apartments or houses. We've got some apartments, what they cost to rent. And we've got, dental services here, right? Haircuts, right? All these different things in this basket. And then we go out every year and we calculate how much it would cost to produce that same basket of goods. And then you take the given year's GDP and you divide it by what we call the GDP chain price index. So let's say that the year 2000 is my base year, okay? In the base year, it cost $100 to buy these things. Now you go out this year, 2021, buy basically those same things, and it costs $255. We take this year's cost of the basket divide it by the base years, then we multiply it by 100 to make it look pretty. So this would be 2.55 times 100. And we would say that the GDP chain price index for this year is 255. What that means is roughly, it would cost you $255 today to buy the same thing that cost you $100 in the base year. Okay. If we get rid of that pretty 100, it makes even more sense. $2.55 today is the equivalent of $1 in the base year. Okay. And then we take the nominal GDP for 2020, divide it by this GDP chain price index, and multiply it by 100. That's to cancel this 100 out. And that gives us real GDP. So let's say GDP this year was 25.5 trillion dollars. That's nominal GDP, and it's probably pretty close to that. Then we divide it by that GDP chain price index of 255. Then we multiply it by 100. That's going to come out to $0.1 trillion times 100. And that's in the base year's dollars. So the $25.5 trillion we produced this year, or last year in 2020's dollars, divided by the GDP chain price index for 2020. I showed you how we calculate that. That comes out to 0.1 trillion. But we got the 100 in here. Oh no. That we used here to make it look pretty. So this cancels that 100 out, and we'd have $10 trillion in real GDP. Okay. That's calculated in the year 2000's dollars. Then we can go back and compare it over time and say, oh, last year we made $9.8 trillion in real GDP. So the economy grew by roughly $200 billion. Okay. But you got to adjust it for price using that GDP chain price index, using this formula to discuss changes over time. That's the end. Okay, thank you very much. Close the time.
Yeah, continue to.
We're out of time?
You're over, a little over, not far.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I gotta get that clock fixed. I don't want to keep grabbing my phone out. I feel uncomfortable grabbing my phone out of my pocket in front of you. Okay, see you guys. Have a good one. Oh, we're gonna move quick. Read What has government done to our money? Start reading that now.
Whole thing?
Yeah, next lecture is going to be maybe a day, and then 17. I'm just going to go over a couple things in 17, and then we'll do what has government done to our money and get the test. Second test.
So we just need to read that, like there's. Just read through it.
Yes.
Should I take notes?